Hey, it feels different, right?
Hello and welcome to episode 1 of season 4 of Fantasy Sports. Obviously, this is the season premiere, so I thought we'd kick it off with some football. Regardless if the season is not going on or not, I want to talk about the free agency signings that have been going on. I know I'm super excited to get into it, and I hope you guys are just as excited as I am for this new season. Last season, I didn't do a lot of video during my talking. I think that's something I want to incorporate back into what I've been, what I was doing. There was a point in which I had overlay in, player games and, commentary. I think I want to focus more on doing that, getting in some more like graphics into what I'm actually speaking about and what I'm looking at and what I'm talking about, incorporating more like actual speakers. I didn't have a lot last couple videos or last season. Being in school, it just got way harder, and especially the platform I have here at school is just harder for me to have a lot of speakers on. But I do want to focus on that this season, and I hope you guys enjoy that and look forward to it, because I know I sure am. But to start off, I want to talk about free agency like I had mentioned. I'm going to talk about some of the key free agent signings. I won't go into all of them, obviously, because I'm looking at it right now. And there's too many to list that are, significant, obviously, but not super important as some of the other ones. So starting off, I want to go position by position. I think that'll be important. I'm not going to go through all the positions, obviously, but I will go through the positions with more or less key signings or like big name signings. And I feel like the most important way to start off is obviously with quarterback. There's a lot of movement, especially being a Steelers fan. We had Justin Fields get traded, and we also had a signing of Russell Wilson. I think both of those are great moves. A lot of people talked about how Russell Wilson, still wasn't like he was in the past, but I think regardless, he's a veteran quarterback who we need very much. I do believe Justin Fields can learn from him, and I do believe getting Justin Fields for only a 6th-round pick and getting Russell Wilson for only $2 million, given, it wasn't even $2 million, it was 1.2. Looking at last year's quarterback room, Mason Rudolph, Kenny Pickett. Obviously, we got rid of Kenny Pickett, our 1st-round pick, which was a bigger deal than I thought it may have been, just because of what he had produced in the past 2 years. I mean, he threw 14 touchdowns and then 13 touchdowns, I believe. I think it's a great upgrade, regardless of how the season winds up going. I think we made the steps to better our team. So I think everyone who's a Steelers fan should be happy with that, and not look at the fact that we signed a quarterback in Justin, or traded for a questionable quarterback in Justin Fields, and traded and signed a veteran older quarterback in Russell Wilson. As for the other quarterbacks, Kirk Cousins signed with the Atlanta Falcons. That was another significant move. I think for the Falcons, maybe not for Kirk Cousins and the Vikings. I think this, for me, was one of the more shocking things. I think a lot of people expected him to wind up staying in Minnesota, and I definitely didn't expect him to go to the Falcons. I think the Falcons have a really good team. I think last year they were a very good team with, Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke. So looking at the fact that now they have Kirk Cousins, someone who can clearly throw the ball very, very well, obviously led Justin Jefferson to have some of the best seasons we've ever seen from a wide receiver. I think with Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, a very good offensive line, as well as Rondell Moore and some of the Darnell Mooney signings. I think we'll see a very, very good Atlanta Falcons offense, and their defense was not at all bad last year. It was actually one of their strong points. So I think they have a very, very strong possibility at winning that division, given that the Panthers are in it. Obviously, the Baker signed back with the Buccaneers, and they had a decent season, but they didn't have a great season. They lost some of their cornerbacks, as well as defensive linemen or edge rushers. I forget where Shaq Barrett wound up signing. But I think they have all the rights right now with Kirk Cousins as the quarterback, regardless of the injury, to win that division, and I think that's one of the biggest signings. $180 million, I don't know if I love, especially with his age and with the injury, but I think he's obviously one of the better quarterbacks in the league, and when he was playing last year, I mean, he was on pace to have insane numbers, so I'm definitely excited to see what he can do on a team like that, and excited to see what Jake London and Kyle Pitts can do with an actually very strong quarterback back there. Focusing on the running backs, this is kind of where it gets really, really a lot of change. This was the most change I had seen from a running back room or like running back free agency in a while. Pretty much every big name running back that was a free agent wound up going to a different team. We saw Saquon go to the Eagles, Josh Jacobs go to the Packers, Derrick Henry go to the Ravens. We saw Austin Eckler go to the Commanders. We saw DeAndre Swift go to the Bears. We saw Tony Pollard go to the Titans, and we saw Aaron Jones wind up going to the Vikings. A lot of moves, a lot of stuff to cover. I think of all these, the Derrick Henry to the Ravens is my favorite just because I love Lamar, obviously, like I've mentioned multiple times in my podcast. But also Derrick Henry, although his age and although he was slowing down last year, he was on a bad Titans team that obviously had a different, way they were going with their team. And he is still Derrick Henry. I mean, obviously in the season prior to last, he pretty much had a very, very, very strong season coming off of his 2,000-yard or almost 2,000-yard season. I believe he had a 2,000-yard season. He is still that guy, and he is still Derrick Henry, and I think putting him in a backfield with Lamar Jackson is one of those things that is just not going to be fair. I mean, I'm so excited to watch that. I couldn't emphasize how excited I was when they wound up signing him because I'd been talking about that for a while. I know a lot of people have been talking about the fact that the Ravens were running back away. And it had been that way for a couple years. I kept mentioning the fact that imagine just if they had that line and Lamar and that offense, but they had a running back that was actually really, really good. And I think Derrick Henry is obviously going to get the job done there. Saquon to the Eagles, obviously flipped the script going from the Giants to the Eagles. I know a lot of fans aren't happy about that, but I think for Saquon getting the money he wanted, about $12.5 million a year, is important to him, and I knew this was going to happen. I didn't know he was going to sign with the Eagles, obviously. I doubt anyone knew that was going to wind up happening, but I knew that he wasn't going to wind up staying with the Giants or was not going to stay with the Giants, just based off the conversation they had in the previous season when it came down to franchise tagging him. He was not happy, and I think that kind of stained the relationship that they both had with each other. But I think the Eagles signing him is great. I mean, that offense is now Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, Saquon, with a still very strong offensive line. They re-signed Landon Dickinson. They still have Lane Johnson. They obviously lost Jason Kelce, but they have Cam Jurgens just to back him up. So I think it's going to be still a very, very, very good offense. If not, I mean, obviously it's the same offense as last year, but with just a better running back. Obviously, Swift move over to the Bears. That was a good signing for them. They're planning to shape up to, wind up signing or drafting Caleb Williams, it seems, or whatever first-round quarterback they wind up getting. But that Chicago's Bear team made a lot of depth in their team. They traded for Keenan Allen. They re-signed, or they signed, what's his name, the corner. I can't recall his name at this moment, but they re-signed him to a big deal. So obviously that team is making their strides as well. As for Austin Eckler signing it with the Commanders, I didn't think this was a big move. I mean, he got a pretty low-paying contract of $5 million a year. He had a pretty weak season last season, and I think in the seasons prior to that, obviously he had done good. He led the league in touchdowns multiple years in a row, but he got old, and it looks like he got slow. And I just don't think at this point in his career he's where he was a couple years ago. Obviously, he's not the same player, although they want him to be. I know the Commanders like these types of guys. Like Antonio Gibson reminds me a lot of Austin Eckler in terms of like what they both want to or do on the field. But I think it's still a good signing nonetheless. They got him for cheap. He's still Austin Eckler. Who knows what he could go out there and produce. And then for Tony Pollard, I think this contract to me is the most confusing only because he got $8 million a year. But I don't know. The Titans also signed L'Jarius Sneed, but they still have Will Levis at quarterback. So I guess the question to me is, they have a lot of players that are win now. I believe they just signed Jadeveon Clowney as well. They have a lot of strong players on their team, but they believe in Will that much that he will take them to the next step? And I think Pollard is young, and I don't think he had a great season last year. And I don't know if it was Pollard or if it was the offensive line or if it was just that offense. But that offense seemed to thrive with Dak Prescott at quarterback, especially in the passing game. And it just didn't seem like Tony Pollard, with the change of pace, didn't really seem to do much without Ezekiel Elliott. So it's definitely concerning for me to see what Tony Pollard is going to do at the Titans offense, as well as what the Titans are going to do this year in terms of their division. Focusing now on wide receivers. The T. Higgins franchise tag was definitely interesting to me. Obviously, paying a player like T. Higgins $23 million a year is not a bad idea, but I mean, he's T. Higgins, and like that's money that is like, wide receiver 1, top 10 wide receiver money, and he's just not that. Especially with the same thing in terms of Michael Pittman. I mean, he got $70 million, and that's about $23 million a year. Again, it's just confusing. Obviously, Michael Pittman had a great season last year, and I'm sure being a young wide receiver and wanting him to produce with Anthony Richardson is important. I just personally think the wide receiver market has changed so drastically that it concerns me, because when you see a player when you see this money getting thrown around, I get how important a wide receiver is, but Calvin Ridley to get almost $25 million a year after the season he just had, which wasn't that good, is just definitely something exciting, confusing to me. But given he signed with the Titans, and like I said, the Titans made a lot of moves, Calvin Ridley, now they have Calvin Ridley, Tony Pollard, DeAndre Hopkins, Will Levis, Jadeveon Clowney, L'Jarius Sneed. A lot of additions on their team, but again, I just keep going back to the question, what are they going to do with that quarterback as well? Going to be the guy? Are they going to draft a guy in the draft, or are they going to draft a guy with their first-round pick? But given still like both of those moves, the Calvin Ridley, Michael Pittman move, I don't love the T Higgins move, but I do understand it, and I do understand that they want to work towards a contract with him. In terms of a person who hasn't gotten a contract, Brandon Ayuk, that's a big topic of discussion within the 49ers. Obviously, we saw him post like a cryptic message, and everyone was concerned as to what that meant. I know personally that Brandon Ayuk is a great, like, shifty wide receiver. I think he thrives in that offense, and I think he's the best wide receiver on that team. I just don't think that the team itself values what he does because of how strong they've been the past couple seasons without him. Before him, sorry, not without him. I do understand why they maybe don't want to give him, like the Calvin, like if Calvin Ridley's getting $24 million a year or 22, whatever, 21, whatever the amount of money is. I understand that they're going to assume that Brandon Ayuk wants that similar payday, and I don't know if they're going to wind up giving it to him. So that's something definitely to watch out, and definitely that I find interesting. And for the last wide receiver signing, not Calvin Ridley, sorry. Marquise Brown going to the Chiefs for a pretty cheap contract is definitely something that I think is extremely important. Them getting a wide receiver, people thinking, obviously he doesn't have hands. Obviously he's been injured. I mean, Marquise Brown, he is a solid wide receiver, and that's all you need when you're the Chiefs. I mean, you're coming off 2 back-to-back championships with Juju Smith and Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Marquise Brown is a significant upgrade from that, so I'm definitely excited to see that. Not a lot of moves in the tight end department. Obviously, Dalton Schultz re-signed, Hunter Henry re-signed, Gerald Everett moved to the Bears, Noah Fant re-signed, Troutman re-signed, a lot of re-signing. But I guess obviously the Gerald Everett move to Chicago Bears is probably the most significant there. Younger tight end, I should say, had a pretty good seasons with the Chargers and the Rams. Like I had said before with the Titans, the Bears are going to be pretty good on offense with all the new additions that they had made, as well as the defense. And I'm excited to see that depending on who they draft. I don't know who right now I think is the best quarterback in the draft. I mean, obviously, Caleb Williams seems to be the consensus number 1 overall pick. But I think Jaden Daniels is really good. I think Drake May is good, but I just don't know if Drake May is NFL, like I don't know if he's ready for the NFL. I do like, what's his name? The guy from the Washington, Michael Penix. I think I don't know, I just like lefty players. I think he's going to be interesting to watch. And I'm hoping a team drafts him and winds up starting him. But you never know what's going to wind up going on with that. In terms of the interior defensive line, focusing on defense, we saw a lot of re-signs. We also saw a lot of movement. Chris Jones re-signed with the Chiefs. Madubuike for the Ravens, who had a sensational year last year. I was so happy about this signing over Patrick Queen. Re-signed for $100 million. I thought people call him the next Aaron Donald. I think he looked fantastic last year. He's extremely young. He's the exact type of player I want to see on the Ravens just because he fits that defense so well. Given Patrick Queen is obviously a great linebacker, but I think he went to the Steelers, which I'm extremely happy about too. I mean, that's a great signing. I just think Madubuike is so much better than a linebacker, because a linebacker is obviously extremely important, but everything that he does, Justin, is just so built on helping other players, but also producing, and that's what he's been doing so good, and that's what I like about him so much. I guess the biggest move in terms of moving an interior defensive lineman were Fletcher Cox's retirement and Christian Wilkins signing with the Raiders for $110 million. Obviously, the Dolphins didn't do much in free agency, and losing someone like Christian Wilkins, who had pretty much 2 career years back to back, to the Raiders is extremely important. It was something that when I first saw, I was definitely shocked by. He was someone who I did not only not know was a free agent. He was someone who I had no expectations to wind up leaving, especially with all that had been going on. As a young player who they drafted, who had been producing for them. I did not expect them to let him walk, and let alone walk to the Raiders. But I think regardless, with the moves the Raiders made, I think this was one of the stronger ones. Obviously, getting rid of Josh Jacobs was a question mark. But if you think that the rookie running back that they had last year, I forget what his name is, who produced in the last 4 games, can do what he did again, and you get a player like Wilkins, and you're kind of looking at the shift of do we really need to pay a running back rather than paying someone on the defensive lineman? I definitely agree with the move. For edge defenders, this was a lot of different changes. Brian Burns wound up going to the Panthers. Bryce Huff went to the Eagles. Daniel Hunter went to the Texans. Young to the Saints. So many moves. And Zadarius Smith went to the Browns. I really thought a lot of these moves were really important. I thought Brian Burns getting signed by the Giants was extremely good. I thought it was a great move. I think one of the most important things with Brian Burns is getting a long-term contract with the Giants. I think that's something that they need to get done. As for Danielle Hunter, I love this move. I love the Texans and how they rebuilt, how they got Joe Mixon, how they wound up getting Danielle Hunter, how they signed that other linebacker from the Titans. Just good moves. Like, it's really strong, like just making the team better moves. Like, they filled positions they need. They didn't sign anyone they didn't need. I really liked it because they had a great season last year, regardless of what happened in the first round of the playoffs, second round of the playoffs. Sorry. But like, I just love to see a team like that go out and be young, and then also bring in all these veterans who are like very good players. Definitely exciting to see. For the Bryce Huff move to the Eagles, again, another very strong move by them. This was someone who I felt like flew under the radar for a majority of last season just because the Jets hadn't done that well. But he had, again, one of his strongest seasons, like a lot of these players coming off of last year and then signing these big deals and going into the next year. He had one of his best years with the Jets, and then now he gets $51 million over 3 years. So I'm definitely excited to see that as well. And for my last couple moves, focusing on the cornerbacks and the safeties and so on. Linebackers, obviously, is a different discussion. There was a lot of moves in there, but I don't think any of them, other than Patrick Queen and maybe Aziz Al-Shaair signing with the Texans, the linebacker I had mentioned, were significant. But for the cornerbacks, this is where I definitely wanted to get into it. Kendall Fuller wound up going to the Dolphins. That was a solid move in terms of what money they paid for him. I think they only wound up paying $8 million a year for him. But I really like the move. I really like Kendall Fuller at his age for how good he's been playing. Sean Murphy Bunting going over the Cardinals. We saw Ronald Darby signing with the Jaguars. It's just like players like that, little players, and I know that makes it seem like they're insignificant, but like little signings like that are my favorite just because it's like getting a guy in there who like can produce and will be like able to fill a role very solidly. I liked it that much. I think the biggest signing in cornerbacks right now that I wish someone would sign, because he had a good season 2 years ago and then he kind of like fell off the face of the earth, but he hadn't been playing bad, was Adoree Jackson. I'm pretty sure he's a free agent. He got a big payday from the Giants, kind of disappeared, but I love him. I just love him from college, so I'd be excited to see him go to a team and produce as well. But regardless of all these moves, I think the one thing that I took away from this free agency was more or less that it's a business. This was the biggest season in terms of changings with running backs. You didn't see a lot of movement in the quarterback other than Kirk Cousins, but it really drilled the mind or message home to me that like nothing is really like, unless you're like really the face of the team, which are not a lot of these players were, other than maybe Saquon and maybe not even Kirk. I mean, Justin Jefferson is. It's a business, and people are going to go where they can get the most money, and they're going to change, and they're not going to be able to get re-signed. And I think that's the biggest thing. And I think, especially with T. Higgins, when I think about it, if I'm T. Higgins, regardless of what I want to be remembered for as a Bengal, it's just like, I'm not going to want to sign a 1-year deal contract, get paid $20 million, and then get injured. I'm going to want my money wherever that may be, so that I know I have financial stability. And I think that was just something I very much took away from this year in terms of how many people moved and what went down. But as always, I appreciate you guys watching. I very much enjoyed this offseason, and I hope you guys did too. There's still a lot to go on. And I hope you tune in next week, where I will be having 2 guests here to speak about the Steelers and their current situation. And as always, I appreciate you watching, like I had said before, and tune in next week. Thank you.